What factors propelled the rise of Viking kings from local chieftains to rulers commanding armies, navies, and vast territories across Scandinavia and beyond? The ascent of figures such as Ragnar Lodbrok, Harald Fairhair, and later Harald Hardrada was not merely a product of luck or lineage. It emerged from a combination of personal skill, martial prowess, strategic vision, and an ability to navigate the intricate social, political, and religious networks of Norse society. In the early Viking Age, leadership was often fluid, with chieftains gaining influence through charisma, military success, and the loyalty of warriors and followers. The consolidation of power into kingships reflected both internal pressures, such as the need to manage resources and defend territories, and external opportunities, including trade, raiding, and interaction with neighboring kingdoms. A Viking king was not only a warrior, but also a judge, diplomat, and administrator, embodying both the ideals of Norse masculinity and the practical demands of leadership. Ragnar Lodbrok, one of the most legendary figures of the Viking Age, illustrates the mixture of myth and reality that characterized early kingship. Tales of his exploits in raids across Francia, England, and the Baltic reflect both strategic daring and personal valor, elements essential for establishing and maintaining authority. Leadership in this period required the ability to inspire loyalty through tangible success, victorious campaigns, fair division of plunder, and the protection of one's followers. Ragnar's narrative, though partially legendary, underscores the cultural ideal that kingship was earned through personal merit as much as hereditary right. Charisma, cunning, and bravery were as crucial as noble birth, allowing figures like Ragnar to transcend local leadership and achieve fame across the Viking world. The political landscape of Scandinavia during this era was fragmented, with multiple competing chieftains, small kingdoms, and tribal groups. Resource management, strategic alliances, and the ability to command respect were critical for those seeking greater influence. Kings had to balance the demands of war with governance, ensuring that subjects, warriors, and allies were both motivated and controlled. Feasting, gift-giving, and ritual observance reinforced authority, embedding leaders within the cultural and religious framework of Norse society. Kingship was thus a combination of military competence, economic stewardship, and ritual legitimacy, with the latter ensuring that a ruler's authority was both socially and spiritually sanctioned. Harald Fairhair's rise to power in Norway exemplifies the consolidation of authority through both military conquest and political maneuvering. According to saga tradition, Harald sought to unite disparate Norwegian chieftains under his rule, employing both force and diplomacy. His success depended on strategic marriages, alliances, and the careful management of vassals and subordinates. Harald's example illustrates that Viking kingship was not solely about battlefield heroics. It required vision, organizational skill, and an understanding of human behavior. Leaders who could integrate military strength with political and social acumen were most likely to establish lasting authority, creating the conditions for the emergence of dynastic rule in Scandinavia. Kingship also required mastery of naval and raiding operations, which were central to both wealth accumulation and prestige. Command of fleets allowed kings to project power beyond their immediate territories, secure trade routes, and conduct raids that enriched both themselves and their followers. Successful raiding campaigns enhanced reputation and reinforced loyalty among warriors, creating a reciprocal relationship in which kingship was maintained through tangible demonstrations of competence and opportunity. Naval strategy, shipbuilding, and the coordination of longships became essential skills for rulers, reflecting the interdependence of martial and logistical capabilities in the Viking conception of leadership. Harald Hardrada, who emerged in the 11th century, represents the apex of this fusion of military, political, and cultural competence. Born into the royal family of Norway, Hardrada's early life was shaped by exile, military service, and exposure to foreign courts, including Byzantium. Serving in the elite Varangian Guard, he gained experience in sophisticated military operations, administration, and diplomacy. This period honed his strategic vision, leadership skills, and understanding of international politics, preparing him for the challenges of kingship upon his return to Norway. Hardrada's career illustrates the cosmopolitan dimension of later Viking rulers, who combined traditional Norse ideals of valor with practical knowledge acquired through extensive travel and service abroad. The transition from local chieftaincy to centralized kingship was also facilitated by religious and cultural factors. Kings derived legitimacy not only from martial success, but also through ritual observance, adherence to Norse religious norms, and participation in ceremonies that reinforced social hierarchies. Sacrifices, feasts, and other ritual acts affirmed the king's role as intermediary between the gods and the community, providing both spiritual authority and social cohesion. Integration of emerging Christian influences further complicated the dynamics of legitimacy as rulers navigated the tension between pagan tradition and new religious ideas. By skillfully managing these spiritual and cultural dimensions, kings reinforced their authority and positioned themselves as indispensable leaders. The economic foundations of kingship were equally critical. Control over trade, tribute, and resource-rich territories enabled kings to finance armies, maintain fleets, and reward followers. Centers of commerce, such as Hedeby in Denmark or Trondheim in Norway, provided hubs for economic activity that underpinned political power. Kings who could secure access to resources, regulate trade networks, and distribute wealth effectively strengthened both their material position and their social influence. Wealth was inseparable from authority, enabling rulers to maintain loyalty, project power, and facilitate the cultural and religious activities that validated their reign. Harald Hardrada's consolidation of power also highlights the interplay of ambition, diplomacy, and opportunism in Viking kingship. He navigated a complex political landscape upon returning to Norway, leveraging alliances, military victories, and strategic marriages to secure his position. His campaigns extended beyond Norway, involving interactions with Denmark, England, and other European powers. Hardrada's reign demonstrates that kingship in the Viking Age was not static. It required constant adaptation, negotiation, and proactive engagement with both domestic and foreign challenges. Authority was maintained through a combination of force, diplomacy, and symbolic gestures, reflecting the multifaceted nature of power in Norse society. Military campaigns under Viking kings were both tools of expansion and tests of leadership. Kings led armies in battle, directed naval operations, and coordinated logistics, demonstrating competence to followers and rivals alike. The ability to inspire loyalty, enforce discipline, and make strategic decisions in high-stakes situations was central to maintaining authority. Battles were not merely contests of strength, but arenas in which reputations were forged, alliances were tested, and political claims were validated. Success enhanced prestige and reinforced social hierarchies, while failure could undermine authority and provoke rebellion or loss of territory. Kingship demanded continuous performance in these high-pressure environments. Kings also mediated internal conflicts, adjudicated disputes, and maintained order within their realms. Justice, often administered at local assemblies known as things, was a critical aspect of leadership. By resolving conflicts, protecting property, and ensuring fair treatment, kings reinforced their role as guarantors of stability and justice. This legal function was intertwined with social, economic, and military responsibilities, reflecting the holistic nature of Viking kingship. Authority was validated through effective governance as well as martial success, emphasizing the multidimensional expectations placed upon rulers. The end of the Viking Age, marked by the reign of Harald Hardrada, and the changing political landscape of Europe, signaled the decline of traditional Viking kingship. Increasing centralization of power in neighboring kingdoms, the spread of Christianity, and the rise of professional armies and administrative structures reduced the relative autonomy of Viking rulers. Hardrada's fatal invasion of England in 1066 epitomized both the ambition and the vulnerability of late Viking kings. While his death at Stamford Bridge symbolized the end of an era, it also highlighted the cumulative achievements of centuries of Norse political, military, and cultural development. Kings such as Hardrada combined personal valor, strategic insight, and political acumen to leave a legacy that influenced the trajectory of Scandinavia and Northern Europe long after the Viking Age concluded. Harald Hardrada's death marked a turning point not only in military history, but also in the evolution of governance. The age of semi-independent, mobile, and warrior-focused kings gave way to more centralized, bureaucratically structured monarchies aligned with Christian Europe. Traditional Norse models of kingship, based on charisma, martial prowess, and control over loyal retainers, were increasingly supplanted by institutionalized authority, codified law, and dynastic succession. Yet the cultural memory of these rulers, their raids, governance, and adventurous lives remained deeply embedded in Scandinavian consciousness, forming a foundation for historical narratives, sagas, and national identity. The rise and fall of Viking kings, from legendary figures such as Ragnar Lodbrok to Harald Hardrada, illustrates the complexities of leadership in a transitional period. Success required a blend of martial skill, strategic intelligence, social acumen, and cultural legitimacy. Authority was maintained through both tangible achievements and symbolic acts that reinforced social cohesion and spiritual sanction. Kingship was a dynamic process, responsive to environmental, economic, and political pressures, and it evolved in dialogue with both internal society and external forces. The trajectory of Viking rulers reflects the adaptability, ambition, and skill that defined Norse leadership, while also highlighting the vulnerabilities inherent in a system built on personal authority and military success. Even as centralized states emerged elsewhere in Europe, the legacy of Viking kings endured through their influence on political structures, trade networks, and cultural memory. Their reigns demonstrated the interplay of courage, strategy, and diplomacy, offering lessons in leadership, resilience, and adaptability that transcended the Viking Age. The stories of Ragnar, Harald Fairhair, and Harald Hardrada continue to capture imagination because they reveal the human dimensions of power, ambition, risk, skill, and the perpetual negotiation between authority and circumstance. The rise and fall of these rulers marks both the apex of Viking kingship and the closing chapter of an era defined by mobility, martial prowess, and cultural dynamism. This foundation set the stage for the next phase of Scandinavian history, where centralized monarchies, Christianization, and integration into European political and economic systems would redefine power, governance, and society, leaving the Viking kings as iconic figures whose lives bridged myth, legend, and historical reality. The consolidation of power among Viking kings continued to evolve as the Viking Age progressed, reflecting both internal pressures within Scandinavia and external opportunities and threats abroad. Harald Hardrada's reign in Norway serves as a key example of how the ambitions and capabilities of a single ruler could shape the political landscape of the region. By the mid-11th century, the Norwegian kingdom had emerged as a relatively unified entity, yet the king's authority was continually tested by powerful chieftains, rival claimants, and the ever-present threat of foreign intervention. Maintaining control required a combination of military strength, political acumen, and strategic alliances, with the king acting simultaneously as a warlord, administrator, and arbiter of justice. Power was not granted solely by birthright. It had to be earned and continually demonstrated through action, decision-making, and the ability to protect and provide for one's followers. Harald Hardrada's military campaigns exemplify the intertwining of ambition and necessity in Viking kingship. Before securing the Norwegian throne, he had spent years abroad, serving in the Byzantine Varangian Guard. This experience provided him with a sophisticated understanding of military strategy, logistics, and leadership. The Varangian Guard, composed primarily of Scandinavian warriors, offered training in organized warfare, siege tactics, and the management of soldiers from diverse cultural backgrounds. Hardrada's exposure to these methods allowed him to return to Norway with skills that exceeded those of many domestic rivals. His campaigns to consolidate power were characterized by a combination of forceful suppression of rebellious chieftains, strategic marriages to secure loyalty, and the careful management of tribute and resources. By integrating both military and administrative approaches, Hardrada exemplified a new kind of Viking king, one who combined traditional martial values with the organizational sophistication gleaned from foreign service. The economy under Viking kings like Hardrada was closely tied to both domestic stability and external trade. Control of ports, river routes, and trading hubs provided essential revenue through taxation, tribute, and commerce. Cities such as Trondheim and Bergen became centers of economic and political activity, linking local production to broader trade networks that extended across the North Sea, the Baltic, and even into the Mediterranean. Kings ensured that wealth flowed to their supporters, rewarding loyal warriors and officials while maintaining the infrastructure necessary for continued expansion. Economic control reinforced political authority, as wealth enabled the financing of fleets, armies, and ceremonial obligations, all of which were central to the legitimacy of rulership. A king who failed to manage resources effectively risked losing loyalty, influence, and the very foundation of his power. Hardrada's international ambitions also illustrate the increasingly global dimension of Viking kingship in the 11th century. He sought to extend his influence into Denmark and England, capitalizing on dynastic claims and exploiting periods of political instability abroad. His campaigns involved careful planning, recruitment of experienced warriors, and the logistical coordination of fleets and supplies. These expeditions required not only tactical competence, but also diplomacy, intelligence gathering, and negotiation with both allies and enemies. The ability to operate effectively in foreign territories demonstrated a king's skill in combining strategy, leadership, and adaptability, qualities that were essential for survival and success in the volatile geopolitical environment of the period. The rise of Viking kings was accompanied by the increasing codification of laws and the formalization of governance. Assemblies known as things continued to function as centers for local justice, dispute resolution, and communal decision-making. Kings participated in these assemblies, mediating conflicts and issuing judgments that reinforced their authority while maintaining social cohesion. Legal competence was a key aspect of leadership, as it signaled fairness, wisdom, and the ability to protect the interests of subjects. By balancing military prowess with legal and administrative duties, Viking kings legitimized their rule and demonstrated that authority rested on both strength and governance. The most effective rulers were those who could navigate the demands of war and peace, ensuring stability while pursuing opportunities for expansion. Religion remained a crucial tool for legitimizing authority. While the Viking Age had begun as a predominantly pagan society, by Hardrada's time, Christianity was spreading across Scandinavia, often in tension with older Norse beliefs. Kings used religious symbols, ceremonies, and affiliations to reinforce their authority, whether through traditional sacrifices, temple observances, or alignment with Christian institutions. Harald Hardrada, while still influenced by Norse customs, engaged diplomatically with Christian rulers and institutions, recognizing the benefits of aligning with the dominant religious powers of Europe. Religious legitimacy was thus intertwined with political strategy, enhancing the king's image as both a divinely sanctioned ruler and a practical, capable administrator. Military innovation continued to be a defining feature of Viking kingship. Hardrada's forces combined traditional longships, skilled infantry, and cavalry tactics learned abroad to create versatile and formidable armies. Naval prowess remained central, as control of rivers, fjords, and coastal routes allowed kings to project power, transport troops, and secure trade. Campaigns were meticulously planned, with attention to supply lines, seasonal conditions, and intelligence on enemy positions. Kings who excelled at integrating tactical innovation with disciplined execution gained both material and symbolic advantage, reinforcing their authority and inspiring loyalty among their followers. The socio-political environment of the time placed constant demands on Viking kings to manage relationships with subordinates, peers, and rivals. Chieftains, landowners, and nobles were often granted autonomy in exchange for military support, yet their loyalty was never guaranteed. Kings needed a careful balance of incentives and enforcement to maintain cohesion. Feasts, gift-giving, and displays of generosity reinforced loyalty and social bonds, while decisive action against dissenters demonstrated strength and deterred rebellion. Authority was therefore a constant negotiation, requiring both skillful diplomacy and the credible threat of force. Successful kings managed to project both the charisma and competence necessary to secure allegiance and command respect. Hardrada's ambition ultimately led him to pursue the English throne, exploiting the weakened state of England following the death of Edward the Confessor. This venture was both a strategic gamble and a demonstration of the expansive vision characteristic of late Viking kings. Coordinating a multinational force, he sailed with a fleet of hundreds of ships, showcasing both logistical skill and military command. The campaign culminated in the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, where Hardrada's forces faced King Harold Godwinson of England. Despite his experience and the formidable nature of his army, Hardrada was killed, marking a decisive moment in the decline of Viking military dominance and signaling the end of an era in which Scandinavian kings could directly influence Western European politics through conquest. The death of Harald Hardrada had profound implications for Norway and the wider Scandinavian world. It marked the conclusion of aggressive expansionism as a primary avenue for asserting kingship and the beginning of a shift toward internal consolidation, dynastic succession, and integration with emerging European political structures. The Viking model of leadership, which relied heavily on personal valor, military success, and flexible governance, gradually gave way to more bureaucratic, centralized forms of rule aligned with Christian Europe. Yet the legacy of kings like Hardrada persisted, embedded in cultural memory, legal traditions, and political structures that continued to shape Scandinavia for generations. Throughout the 11th century, the consolidation and decline of Viking kingship illustrate the complex interplay between ambition, skill, and circumstance. Military capability remained essential, but kings were increasingly required to master administration, diplomacy, economic management, and cultural legitimization. Authority was validated through success in multiple domains, including warfare, trade, justice, and ritual observance. Leaders who could integrate these aspects effectively maintained stability and expanded influence, while those who failed often faced revolt, loss of territory, or death. The period of Hardrada's reign highlights the demands of rulership in a transitional era, when the traditional Viking ethos of personal valor intersected with the emerging realities of medieval European politics. The evolution of Viking kingship also reflects broader societal changes. As kingdoms became more centralized, chieftains and local leaders were incorporated into hierarchical structures under royal authority. Administrative mechanisms, taxation, and legal codification enhanced the king's control over distant territories, reducing reliance on personal loyalty alone. Trade networks, both domestic and international, became increasingly important for sustaining political and military power. The wealth generated by commerce and tribute allowed kings to maintain armies, fleets, and infrastructure, reinforcing their capacity to govern effectively. In this context, the Viking king was not merely a warrior, but a complex political actor, balancing domestic governance, external diplomacy, and military engagement to maintain authority. The cultural memory of Viking kings reinforced their symbolic importance long after their political influence waned. Sagas, chronicles, and oral histories celebrated figures such as Ragnar Lodbrok, Harald Hardrada, and Harald Hardrada, blending historical fact with legend to preserve ideals of courage, leadership, and ambition. These narratives shaped perceptions of kingship, providing models of authority and valor that influenced subsequent generations. Even as the Viking Age ended, the figure of the Viking king remained central to Scandinavian identity, embodying both the achievements and the challenges of leadership in a dynamic, unpredictable world. Harald Hardrada's reign epitomizes the apex and final phase of traditional Viking kingship. He demonstrated how personal experience, international exposure, military skill, and political acumen could be synthesized into a form of leadership capable of shaping entire regions. His campaigns, domestic policies, and diplomatic engagements illustrate the multifaceted responsibilities of kingship, where success depended on mastering both internal governance and external projection of power. Yet his death also underscores the vulnerabilities inherent in a system reliant on individual ability and martial initiative, revealing the limits of the Viking model in the context of a rapidly changing European political landscape. The period following Hardrada's death saw the gradual decline of the Viking Age as a distinct military and cultural epoch. Scandinavian societies transitioned toward more centralized monarchies, with Christianization and integration into European political and economic structures altering the traditional balance of power. The era of kings who relied primarily on personal valor, rating, and flexible allegiances gave way to rulers supported by institutional frameworks, codified laws, and bureaucratic administration. Nevertheless, the legacy of Viking kings continued to influence political culture, military organization, and societal values, leaving an enduring imprint on the identity and historical memory of Scandinavia. Through the rise and fall of figures like Ragnar Lodbrok, Harald Hardrada, and Harald Hardrada, the Viking Age provides insight into the nature of leadership, ambition, and societal transformation. Success as a king required a delicate balance of martial skill, political intelligence, economic oversight, and cultural legitimacy. Authority was earned and maintained through a combination of personal competence, strategic action, and ethical observance, reflecting the holistic expectations of Norse society. The trajectory of Viking kingship highlights the interplay between individual capability and historical circumstance, illustrating how rulers shaped and were shaped by the world around them. The The stories of these kings, from the early legends of Ragnar to the cosmopolitan exploits of Hardrada, capture the imagination because they reveal a culture in which leadership was both a practical necessity and a moral and symbolic endeavor. Their reigns illustrate the possibilities and limitations of power, the integration of personal ambition with communal responsibility, and the ways in which warfare, trade, diplomacy, and ritual intertwined to define rulership. By examining the rise and fall of Viking kings, one can understand not only the mechanics of power in the Viking Age, but also the enduring cultural and historical impact of these iconic figures. The death of Harald Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 marked the symbolic end of the Viking Age and the traditional model of Viking kingship. Yet, the significance of his reign and those of earlier rulers cannot be measured solely in terms of conquest or territory. It lies also in the ways in which these kings shaped political, social, and cultural landscapes across Scandinavia and beyond. Hardrada's campaigns, governance, and international diplomacy illustrate how Viking rulers balanced martial ambition with administration, legal authority, and cultural legitimacy. His life reflected the culmination of centuries of evolution in Norse leadership, demonstrating both the potential for greatness and the vulnerabilities inherent in a system reliant on personal ability and warrior-based loyalty. Following Hardrada's death, Norway faced the challenge of succession and consolidation. His heir, Magnus II, and later Olaf III, had to navigate the fragile balance of central authority and local autonomy. The mechanisms that had supported Harald's authority, personal charisma, military competence, and loyal retainers remained important, but had to be supplemented by more institutionalized forms of governance. Local chieftains and regional leaders continued to wield significant influence, and kings increasingly relied on assemblies, codified law, and alliances to maintain control. The transition reflected a broader European trend: the decline of semi-autonomous warrior-based authority in favor of centralized monarchies capable of sustaining bureaucratic administration and long-term stability. The economic dimension of kingship also shifted in the aftermath of Hardrada's campaigns. Trade networks that Vikings had developed across the North Atlantic, Baltic, and European mainland continued to flourish, but the methods of control evolved. Rather than relying primarily on raiding or tribute, monarchs began to emphasize taxation, trade regulation, and the development of urban centers. Ports and markets, such as Bergen and Trondheim, became hubs of economic activity that strengthened royal authority and created new avenues for wealth accumulation. The integration of Viking economies into broader European trade networks facilitated not only prosperity, but also the emergence of a political elite whose power was less dependent on battlefield success and more on administration, diplomacy, and economic management. Christianization accelerated during this period, further transforming the nature of kingship. Harald Hardrada himself had maintained pagan practices while interacting diplomatically with Christian rulers, reflecting the transitional character of his reign. In the decades following his death, Norwegian kings increasingly adopted Christianity, aligning their authority with the Church. Religious affiliation provided legitimacy in the eyes of both domestic and foreign powers, reinforcing social cohesion and offering a moral framework for governance. Christian institutions, such as bishoprics and monasteries, became centers of learning, administration, and political influence, reshaping the relationship between king and community and embedding Scandinavian polities within the broader European Christian order. The military culture that had defined Viking kingship also evolved. While raiding and long-distance conquest diminished, martial skill remained a central component of authority. Kings maintained standing armies and fleets, often composed of trained warriors whose loyalty was guaranteed through payment and social contracts rather than solely by personal charisma. Fortifications, garrisons, and defensive strategies became increasingly important as threats shifted from opportunistic raids to organized campaigns by neighboring kingdoms. Naval capabilities, while less oriented toward plunder, continued to play a critical role in defense, trade protection, and projection of authority. The Viking warrior ethos persisted, but it was increasingly integrated into structured military and political frameworks. Legislation and legal authority became vital tools for asserting kingship in this new context. The codification of laws, the formalization of courts, and the systematic administration of justice reinforced royal control and reduced reliance on personal influence or ad hoc arbitration. Kings were expected to act as guarantors of social order, mediators of disputes, and enforcers of contracts. This legal authority not only strengthened the state but also reinforced the moral and cultural legitimacy of the king. By integrating governance, law, and justice with military and economic power, Scandinavian monarchs transitioned from semi-autonomous warrior chiefs to institutionalized rulers capable of sustaining stable and cohesive kingdoms. The end of the Viking Age also reflected broader geopolitical changes. England's consolidation under Edward the Confessor and later William the Conqueror, the emergence of Denmark as a centralized power, and the shifting balance of trade in the North and Baltic Seas altered the opportunities available to Scandinavian rulers. Direct military expansion became more challenging, and kings increasingly pursued influence through diplomacy, alliances, and marriage networks. Harald Hardrada's failure at Stamford Bridge demonstrated the limits of traditional Viking strategies, emphasizing the need for political sophistication, logistical planning, and integration into wider European networks. Success in this new era required a more nuanced understanding of power and the ability to navigate complex international landscapes. Cultural memory of the Viking kings remained a potent force, even as their political dominance waned. Sagas, chronicles, and oral histories preserved the deeds of Ragnar Lodbrok, Harald Fairhair, and Harald Hardrada, blending historical fact with legend to convey ideals of leadership, courage, and ambition. These narratives reinforced cultural values and provided models of authority for subsequent generations. Kingship was celebrated not only for its material or territorial achievements, but also for the embodiment of virtues such as honor, bravery, loyalty, and wisdom. Through storytelling, Viking rulers achieved a form of immortality, their lives influencing both the identity and moral framework of Scandinavian society long after their reigns ended. The evolution of Viking kingship also highlights the interplay between personal ambition and structural forces. Leaders like Hardrada combined strategic insight, military skill, and administrative competence to achieve remarkable success. Yet their achievements were constrained by geography, political rivals, and broader social transformations. The vulnerabilities exposed by military defeat or internal dissent underscore the precarious nature of authority based on personal ability. In response, subsequent Scandinavian monarchs emphasized institutions, legal frameworks, and bureaucratic mechanisms to stabilize governance, ensuring that the authority of the king could survive beyond the individual and withstand challenges from both within and outside the kingdom. The integration of Scandinavian kingdoms into the broader European political and religious order further transformed the nature of kingship. Interaction with neighboring powers, participation in continental trade, and alignment with Christian institutions created new expectations and constraints for rulers. Viking kings could no longer rely solely on raiding, personal charisma, or warrior loyalty. They had to engage with diplomacy, law, religion, and commerce in ways that extended beyond the local sphere. The skills acquired through centuries of expansion, exploration, and governance provided a foundation for this transition, allowing Scandinavian monarchs to adapt to changing circumstances while preserving elements of their martial and cultural heritage. Despite the decline of traditional Viking raiding and conquest, the principles established by figures like Hardrada continued to influence Scandinavian political culture. The emphasis on personal competence, strategic vision, and integration of multiple domains of authority, military, economic, legal, and cultural, remained central to effective leadership. Kings were expected to combine decisiveness with prudence, courage with ethical awareness, and ambition with responsibility to subjects and kin. This legacy ensured continuity of values even as the mechanisms of rule shifted from fluid, warrior-centered authority to institutionalized, bureaucratically supported governance. The collapse of Viking expansion also underscores the importance of adaptability in leadership. Kings who failed to adjust to new political realities, whether through overextension, rigid adherence to traditional methods, or miscalculation of external threats, risked failure or death. Hardrada's fatal campaign in England serves as a cautionary example, while demonstrating ambition, courage, and strategic skill. It also highlighted the limitations of relying on personal force in a changing political environment. The lessons learned from such experiences informed the strategies of subsequent rulers, emphasizing the integration of experience, planning, diplomacy, and institutional support as essential components of effective kingship. In conclusion, The rise and fall of Viking kings encapsulates the trajectory of the Viking Age itself, an era defined by exploration, conquest, cultural exchange, and the pursuit of personal and political ambition. Figures like Ragnar Lodbrok, Harald Fairhair, and Harald Hardrada illustrate the possibilities of individual achievement within the Viking system of leadership, demonstrating how martial skill, strategic insight, and social intelligence could produce powerful and influential rulers. At the same time, the decline of this model reflects broader societal changes, including the centralization of authority, Christianization, and integration into European political structures. The Viking kings left a lasting legacy, not only in the territories they controlled or the battles they fought, but also in the cultural memory, ethical ideals, and institutional foundations that continue to shape Scandinavian society for centuries. By understanding the achievements and limitations of these rulers, one gains insight into the nature of leadership in a dynamic and transitional period. Viking kings were at once warriors, administrators, diplomats, and cultural symbols, embodying both the virtues and the vulnerabilities of a society in flux. Their rise and fall illuminate the complexities of power, the interplay of individual ability and structural forces, and the enduring influence of cultural and moral frameworks in shaping human history. Through their lives, the story of the Viking Age is revealed not only as a period of expansion and adventure, but also as an era of innovation, adaptation, and transformation, leaving a legacy that resonates far beyond Scandinavia and the medieval world.